Welcome to Season 4 of the Lead with Coffee podcast, where we continue the journey into how you can change the culture in your business and your home through simple leadership practices. Grab a cup of coffee and get ready to join into today's conversation.
Well, welcome back to the Lead with Coffee podcast. We are here today to talk about a blog we wrote, and now we're going to do a podcast on it called A Seat at the Table. And what this is referring to is some experiences that we have gone through over the last few years, seeing that more and more people are holding their cards really close to them and not willing to openly collaborate with the entire team. And so it could be maybe trying to have too much control, or maybe lack of self-confidence, ego, immaturity. There's a lot of different things, but the bottleneck that's being created between open, successful communication and really poorly planned projects. Did I get that out okay?
That was a lot.
That was a lot.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it a lot, but the state of business has changed, right? It is you're only needed when I ask you. You're on a need-to-know basis on information. And even if you're a prime point person on something, you may not have a seat at that table anymore that you used to. We just saw this recently with a company that's moving, and one of the prime facility managers that should be involved in right-sizing their location has had zero involvement. And
Crazy.
The real estate company is basically deciding what size space you need, how much warehouse space you need, when you're moving, how long your TI is going to take, with no involvement from the people that are actually going to do the work and who have run this business as a facility department for 10 plus years. And so this kind of, I am going to hold all my cards really closely, is what we're watching with a lot of people. And I don't know if business changed because everybody went home and you kind of lost this ability to work together, and getting back into that feels hard. And I only want to talk to you on Zoom, but we have to figure out how to get back together again and work together collaboratively.
And having been in the facility management business for over 20 years now, this has always been an issue where the facilities people didn't get involved in the planning, and it's with the executive team and they're doing everything. However, when it's time to actually do the work, facilities has to be involved, go handle the move, and once they're moved in, run the building. Mm-hmm. And if you're in the facilities department and you're being told to run a building that you know nothing about and were not involved in, and maybe there was a lot of issues that happened in your previous building that you would know to fix in the new building, they get eliminated. And the facilities management has been so much better at getting their foot in the door and having a seat at that table over this last 10 plus years. And now we're seeing it go back the other way again. Mm-hmm. And it's just so sad, because talk about a way to stifle progress. Mm-hmm. Leave the most important people out of the conversation.
Right. I think no matter what your business and what your job is, you're an expert at what you do. And if someone's doing something that you should be involved in and you're not, that gets frustrating and you get unmotivated. And eventually, if this happens to you enough, you'll leave that company and take your expertise to a company that will value you and listen to you and give you a seat at the table. You might not make all the decisions being at the table, but you got to figure out how to put the right people in the right place. And this podcast is for leaders, and we want to help you grow. So part of that is reminding you that you don't make all the decisions. You're not the expert. And if you are, you're not surrounding yourself with the right people.
I just recently heard, if you are the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Mm-hmm. Being a big fish in a little pond gets you nowhere. Mm-hmm. For growth, you need to put yourself in a place where you are not the smartest in the room, maybe the least smartest in the room, but that's how you grow and that's how you are made better. Now, if you have to be the smartest one in the room, we'll just call you bully, because you want to get it your way. And, maybe that's a little rough, but
That's rough.
It
'Cause
is
sometimes
rough.
you are the smartest person in the room. You're not a bully, but you just are the
no,
smartest person in the room.
my point was, if you continue to try to make it so you're the smartest person in the room, then it could be perceived as you're being a bully because you want to control everything else.
Interesting. I would say the smartest person in the room asks the best questions. That doesn't matter what position you are in the organization. Doesn't matter if you're the leader. Doesn't matter if you're the worker. If you're asking the right questions to move something forward, you become the smartest person in the room.
Sure.
Because you are gleaning from the people that know the right answers. And so I think
Yeah.
that's an interesting perspective. David, talk about someone that came and asked us to do work for them and the model that they drew on paper for us. And remember, we are very much servant leadership minded and partnering together and the flow of information and open communication. And when this individual from a servant leadership type organization came in and did this, we were floored.
We were floored, and so this was about a year ago, exactly. Very big project, something that we really wanted to get involved in. It fits right in what we do with construction management and be a representative for the company to help them through this process.
And like an $8 million project.
Yeah, like an
a
$8
big
million
project.
Yeah, a big project. And again, and maybe call me a little naive, but coming from a servant leadership organization, I'm thinking, there's not even a question of how this place is run.
Right.
So when the diagram started being drawn, and we might even have it on a piece of paper somewhere
I think we
around
still
here,
have it on the plans.
it was basically showing a funnel or a channel, which we would say a bottleneck
It was a funnel. He drew a funnel for us.
Yeah, here is the executive team. Here is you, us, and the construction, everything happening on, and here is me in between.
Yep.
And all communication from them would go through me, and then from me to go to us. And Sarah and I are just kind of looking at each other like, this is a need for control.
Yeah.
And it is like the absolute opposite of open communication, open collaboration, because that person doesn't always know the right answers, isn't always available. And instead of having this open collaboration where if I have a question to ask, I can go directly to somebody, now I have to go through someone else. And it blew my mind. And regardless, we didn't end up with the project, which was a whole other misconstrued level of responsibility that he thought he had, but he didn't.
Right.
Right. And so we were told that we would get an interview on all these things, and that was never the case, but that was what we were told. Very interesting. But anyways, that was very unfortunate, but kind of what we're seeing in, maybe not that extreme, but what we've seen a lot in projects that we're working on, or just what other people are experiencing these days.
I think it's very typical of what we're seeing, actually. And the interesting piece about that one is we had been working with the organization for 10 plus years at their highest leadership level on events and projects. So we actually had built very strong relationships with all the top leaders in the organization. And I think that bottleneck diagram probably actually came from intimidation of the relationship that we already had that he didn't have with those leaders. And that's a lot of what he talked about was, I'm struggling to get a seat at the table. I'm struggling to be heard. I'm struggling with the messaging of the project. And we may not have had that struggle because we had spent 10 years building relationships with those leaders of those organizations. But at the end of the day, that is a challenge that's universal. No matter what your business is, there is someone that wants to control. And I think that is a lot of times part of their own insecurity,
Yeah.
their own fear of failure, their own fear that others are going to look better than them. So that information flow. So we wrote the blog, David wrote the blog, talking about kind of post-pandemic. How do we get back to working as a collaborative team on projects? And Dave's been doing projects for 25 years in construction. I've been doing them for 20 plus years in education and healthcare. And so pulling our different viewpoints together is always interesting. But there is a common theme that you have to put the right people in the right place at the right time and have open communication. And if you do not have open communication, your project is going to struggle the entire time because you're going to be sitting there, and this is classic in education. You're going to be sitting there with a group of leaders, but the one leader that actually is allowed to make decisions can never show up on time or isn't prepared or needs another committee or subcommittee to evaluate it more. And you do this cycle every single month. And then you come to the end of the year and it's like, well, I wonder why that didn't get done.
The cycle of undecision.
And everyone in the room on the committee knows exactly why it didn't get done because it was only about one person at the table had full control. A seat at the table means that you are bringing all the people into the room that are critical to be there, that can make decisions and move a project forward, even if you're the leader and you're absent.
Yeah, and I think another thing that we have seen is we do ask a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. We do want to be thorough because to us, these projects, if you don't ask all the questions and you don't have everything lined up, it's not going to end well. And so we have the experience to know what questions to ask, but when our questions don't go past the next person to the people that can make the decisions, it's a train wreck. Mm-hmm. And it's so unfortunate. And we've seen it both ways where, you know, being involved in a nonprofit organization at the executive level, finding out that the chairs of committees have asked tons of questions mm-hmm. that don't get answered because they're never brought to you to even know that it's a concern. Mm-hmm. And there's someone in the middle that either didn't have the bandwidth to make sure that the information was passed through or wanted to have some sense of control. Mm-hmm. And it just blows my mind the amount of egos and non-humility that goes on in this stuff. It's like, what is there to gain? Mm-hmm. You make yourself look like a fool because everyone knows that you have an ego. Mm-hmm. And if you just let that go, God, life would be so much better.
Yeah, we're seeing it on a big project right now. And I think we've talked about it on a previous podcast about it's how you align with your values. Part of our values at our company is integrity. And part of that means that if we know something is going wrong in a project, we are transparent about it. And most of the time in today's climate, it's not anything we can control. China just shut down again. Manufacturing shutting down. You're getting 3 to 4 more weeks delay on something that was supposed to already be here. I can't control a pandemic. But what I can control is how I communicate with the client and tell them exactly what I know, when I learn it, immediately when I learn it. How I message it is that we've just been informed that we have an extra delay due to China shutting down. We are going to keep you posted as soon as we hear additional information on the timelines and schedules. We're going to share that with you. We want to be transparent with you. This isn't anything that anyone could have predicted or controlled. And here's some options if we have to provide something for the event or whatever it is that we're working on. We can get some rentals. We can do this. How do we provide a solution to something, but yet at the same time be very honest? And what we're seeing is people are so afraid to be honest with clients right now because they don't want to look like they're not doing their job well.
Right.
But you can be honest and do your job well. It's how you message and it's how you move forward.
Yeah, I agree. It is all about the messaging, and I don't think there's any time where I can remember that on a project that all the information was held by one person to the very end because they didn't want to share it, and it ended well.
No,
It
never.
it never ends well.
No.
And so this is part of leadership, of having hard conversations of like, look, the reality is this product isn't available anymore, or not going to be available for 3 or 4 weeks. So we can, instead of saying, well, we'll see how it goes, let's come up with a solution like, this is going to cost a little bit more, but we can get it in time. If you provide the client or whoever it is with the truth and with some options and let them make that decision,
Right.
who's in the wrong?
Right.
Nobody.
Nobody.
So that's what we're seeing, and that's what we're trying. That's my frustration, because I've seen it too much and a lot recently of, why can't we just sit down and have some honest conversations and work through it? There are a few people that are going to kick you out of their office or off of your Zoom meeting because you wanted to tell them the truth.
Yeah.
That was going to, ultimately in the long run, help them to have the full picture.
And part of it also, I think, is not holding your cards too close for a false sense of security, right? It's like, if I have the information and it's bad, but I don't share it, and I'm optimistic that it might just show up tomorrow on a sea container across the ocean, right? Like, it might just happen, right? Like, that's not business. That's not leadership. And you have to step into these hard conversations. Having open communication is not just sharing the good stuff.
Right.
It's learning how to lead through the hard stuff. And if you're at that table, and nowadays, this might be that you're on a team, and instead of reply all, pick up the phone,
Right.
talk to the person.
Yep.
See if you can navigate through it, and then go back to the team with, here's the challenge, here's what we did, and here's how we can move it forward. Are we all in alignment? Instead of like, reply all, what do we think? Reply all, what do we think? Should we get on a Zoom together and brainstorm? Like, it's driving me crazy.
Yeah, I have a good example. That's happening this week on a project where we have to do a power shutdown. We're replacing some switchgear, and the structural engineer came back and said we have to replace the footing under the switchgear, which would put a building on a generator for 2 weeks and shut down a fire station twice, and completely avoidable. And so I was working with the architect and trying to get this resolved, and it still wasn't being resolved, and they weren't willing to make the change. So I know the structural engineer. I gave him a call and said, hey, this is the situation we're in. He didn't have the full picture. He didn't understand the impact. He's doing his job, creating a typical footing for this type of switchgear, but it's not the only solution. So when I called him and explained it to him, he's like, yeah, we can probably do that. Completely avoided. Completely avoided after weeks of email streams going back and forth with not everyone having all of the information. So those critical phone calls to let everyone know the big picture, the entire all the information, makes all the difference in the world. Now we've just saved $50,000 on a project and 2 weeks worth of delays because of one phone call.
Pick up the phone.
Pick up
right.
the phone.
The other thing is kind of giving up your need to control.
Ooh.
We talked about this a little bit with the bottleneck, and a lot of times if you're trying to control, you're just an insecure leader. You don't trust people around you. You want all the glory. You want to take all the credit, and you want to look good at the end. But by the way, if your team looks good, you're going to look better, because not only did the project become successful, you now have a great group of leaders that trust you, that want to work with you, and are going to go into the next project with you. So how do you give up control when you're in charge?
Well, there's this word that us leaders have a hard time, some worse than others, and I'm not great at it, but delegation. Delegation to your team and setting them up for success, not just saying, go do this, where they have no idea what they're doing, but teaching them through how it should be done and then delegating the task to them to complete. And there are different levels of delegation. You can say, just figure it out, or you can say, go look at these few things and come back to and tell me what you recommend, or there is completely just go for it. And let me know how it goes. And that comes over time, that comes over experience. But the more you can delegate, not only does it take the to-do list off of your desk, but it also empowers the people below you that you're trying to build up. And if you allow them to do that more and more, you can delegate more and more tasks to them, and they feel empowered. Our last podcast where we're talking about languishing and people just kind of in the blah, if you're giving people more responsibilities and more to do, that's going to lift them up and feel empowered. Like, I have purpose now. I'm in charge of doing something really important. Mm-hmm. And as leaders, we need to do that. Our job as leaders is to build up the leaders behind us so they can be even better leaders than we are.
Yeah, and we have to remember when we're delegating, they're not our assistants.
Right.
So when you delegate, you're delegating in a way that's empowering them to take ownership and lead a piece of the project. You are not giving them, they're not your taskmaster. They're not just going to go build this Excel, come report back to you, and you're going to report it up. That's not how this is working, right? So part of what we have found in teaming is that everyone has their unique strengths. David has a very different strength than I have, than our other team members have. And so when we go into a project, we know, okay, this piece, Sarah's going to own this piece for the first phase because that's her strength. And then David's going to come in on this second phase. And then we're going to keep having different team members come in. And then maybe we'll loop back around and one of us will lead at the end. But we have certain characteristics that we know we walk really well in. And that is part of that seat at the table, right? It's like, we're at this table. Our team knows that when we're empowering you to run these certain parts of the project, that means you get to make decisions. You get to talk to the client. You get to work through the problems. You get to come to us with suggestions for improvement. And we trust you to do this. So that's delegating in our business. It is not, David's going to delegate to me to go write this contract so he can review it, edit it, and give it back to me. And we're going to do this game for a month back and forth. And I'm going to feel like I'm his personal assistant. And that's going to make me leave the organization because that's not my passion, right? To be someone's personal assistant, right? I want to own something and feel like I matter.
And as leaders, I was just thinking about Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, the right seat on the bus. Mm-hmm. And as far as when you're delegating tasks, your senior project manager can handle some much heftier tasks than your intern can. Mm-hmm. Or your project engineer can. There are certain levels, and you should know as the business leader of who can handle what. And you should be able to hand them something that stretches them, mm-hmm. but they're still confident in. Mm-hmm. Don't give it to the intern that doesn't know what they're doing to go write a contract.
Right.
So
they're not the right person at the table.
They're They're not the right person at the table. They don't have the right seat on the bus. So it's all relative. Having a seat at the table means that everyone that is part of a project has a voice and can share their expertise. Mm-hmm. But as leaders with teams behind us, putting the right people in the right seats and delegating the task to them is our job.
Yeah. The final key indicator of setting yourself up for success when you're running a project and putting the right people in the right place is remembering that it's a no-blame game, that you win as a team and you fail as a team. And leaders that have not picked up on this yet probably have people leaving their organization and they're not even wondering why. They're just like, good riddance, next person coming in.
Yeah, those are managers, those aren't leaders.
And so remember that if you're a leader that likes to shift blame and say that wasn't my fault or, that was someone else's responsibility, you got to own it, right? If you're coordinating that, whatever it is that you're working on and pulling the right people to have a seat at the table, then you're going to own the wins and you're going to own the losses. And making sure that your team understands that in the beginning is essential. And we see this a lot with clients right now. We're running big projects. We have a lot of contractors that work for us. And by the way, when they fail, we fail because the client hired us to make sure it works. And so no matter what the issues are, we got to navigate them. We can't just be like, we'll deal with you later at the end of the project. It's like, no, I'm in it now because my company looks bad if your company's not efficient.
And by the way, leader, if someone on your team failed at something, blaming them is like the worst thing you can do, because as the leader, it comes back to you. If they failed, it means you didn't set them up for success. You didn't put them in a place where they could be successful. Mm-hmm. So you cannot blame them. It's back on you. And if you ever were to go to a client or to your boss and blame it on the people that report to you, instead of taking that yourself, you got to think twice about that. You really got to think about who you are, that if you are the leader in the situation, you are ultimately the blame taker. Mm-hmm. You have to own the blame. You can deal with it with your team and navigate it through better the next time, but you can never push that off to someone else. You have to own that your company or your team failed because you didn't set them up for success.
Mm-hmm. And failure is going to happen.
Yeah, failure, that's the other thing. Failure is okay. Mm-hmm. Failure is okay. So
right.
If your team failed on something, it wasn't you, it was one of your team members, taking that to your boss or your client and saying, hey, we blew this one, but this is what we're going to do to fix it. Mm-hmm. So come to the conclusion that I got to be honest. Again, it's that whole thing of trying to hold your cards because you don't want anybody to know. By the way, they're going to find out anyways. But coming to your boss or your client right away and saying, hey, this went really wrong. We have figured it out. We're going to fix it. There's going to be a delay. There's going to be a cost, but this is what we're doing to fix it. That is leadership right there. Mm-hmm. So not blaming, taking the blame, and coming up with solutions and admitting when you weren't able to deliver what you promised.
Yeah. I love the quote, failure to plan is planning to fail. And that is happening daily right now. And people are not including a contingency in their plan.
Yeah.
And you have to include the possibility that your deadline is not going to be met. And that needs to be a part of your plan. That you can have the wildest goals and you can be really successful in your past. But in today's business climate, you never know what is going to shut you down or stop you in your tracks. And you have to plan for it in the beginning. Otherwise, you are planning to fail. You have to be ready for what the unknowns are. You don't have to have a strategy laid out for every single possibility, but you do have to have clear communication and transparency and a willingness to say, we're running into this obstacle, but we have a plan for what we're going to do. We knew in the beginning that this was a possibility, so we made a plan in the beginning for if this piece of it wasn't going to work the way we hoped, that this was going to be the next step in that. And that is part of shifting away from blame and saying, we're planning ahead for the possibility that this might not work the way we want it to. And you see that every day, whether you're moving your house, whether you're moving your business, whether you are working on a project or a deadline. There are a lot of variables that are just not in our control anymore that used to be in our control. And you have to just start to be prepared for that.
Yeah. And so just to kind of wrap this thing up, open communication. It doesn't matter what it is, what situation, personal or business or nonprofit, whatever. Open, clear, collaborative communication is going to pretty much get you through any tough situation you're in. And if you see that the communication isn't there, do what you can to try to open that up. Maybe it's a conversation on the side. Maybe it's a phone call to someone saying, hey, I see what's going on. I notice that you're not telling, all the information. Why is that? Maybe you have a relationship well enough with that person that you can have a hard conversation with them to help them through it. But never, never, never try to hold your cards too close. Try to manage and control everything through ego. Be open, be communicative. Oh, now I can't say a word. Be communicative and just be humble. And that'll get you just about everywhere you want to go. We appreciate that you decided to hang out and spend some time with us discussing life and leadership. It would mean the world to us if you would share this episode on social media to increase our online presence. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a minute to rate it and review it wherever you listen. Mahalo!